The way of St. James to Santiago del Compostela through the hot Spanish countryside, through dry and dusty land, has inspired and shaped all our images of pilgrimage, even to today. One way that it's done that is because of its association with scallop shells, which in French are even called coquilles Saint-Jacques, and which have become the symbol of pilgrims everywhere. In medieval times, people would even sew these to their cloaks or their hats as signs that they were making a pilgrimage and as sources of devotion along the way that they journeyed. The length and arduousness of the journey to Santiago del Compostela, a path that thousands have trod, supported and sustained along their way by charities and monasteries and pilgrim hostels, also shapes our image of what a pilgrimage should be, and also shapes an idea of the generosity that should support pilgrims along their road. For some of the hostels and monasteries and charities along the way to Santiago del Compostela are equipped with beds and shady courtyards in which to rest and drinking fountains. Some of these dispense wine rather than water, meaning that some pilgrims experience their journey in a much more wandering, meandering, stumbling way than others. Perhaps that is intended to reflect the way that St. James, the Apostle, trod through the New Testament. He made less a smooth journey towards a gown of glory on earth than he and his brother John aspired to, less a journey toward places of honor at Jesus' right hand and his left than they hoped, and as we hear in Matthew's Gospel today. Instead, they trod more of a spiraling, winding path, alternating back and forth between moments of understanding the way of Jesus as a way of service, and ultimately of the ultimate sacrifice at the cross, and moments when the appeal of a path of power seemed to direct their steps and motivate them in another direction entirely. Perhaps it's that a spiraling, spring-shaped progress in discipleship, consisting of mistakes and course corrections along the way, is especially appropriate to these sons of Zebedee. And it's also often our own experience of the spring-like Christian pilgrimage of discipleship too. James's eventual executioner, of whom we hear in Acts, who killed him for his perseverance in the way of Jesus, was an embodiment of the appeal of one side of James's oscillation along the way, of the embodiment of another way altogether, toward personal power and personal glory, and rule for the sake of self and places of kingly privilege. The way that Jesus attributes to those Gentiles who lord it over each other and act as tyrants led Herod Agrippa to power and splendor, to the receipt of bribes in the world's first cash for access scandal, to attempts to have his subjects revere him as a god, and then after an illness described a little later on in Acts in gruesome detail, to death, but to death in the service of no one and nothing but himself and his broken kingdom and his aspirations to a place of glory. I talked last week of the need for us all to consider how we can best be shepherds to one another, how we can best care together for the wider flock of our parish too. Now Jesus is teaching about the nature and the qualities of leadership among us, who are his disciples now, in our lives and on our journeys of faith, can help us to develop that common calling to shepherd his people. His lesson takes the form of his own pilgrimage that finds its end in the self-sacrifice and the service of the cross. That's the focus point, the place of glory for Christ that Matthew's whole gospel is moving towards. That's the point where Jesus is both entering into his kingdom and also doing that by becoming his most vulnerable and embracing the giving up of power on behalf of and in order to save his followers and his friends. Even at the point of Matthew's gospel, which Andy read to us this morning, before Jesus enters into Jerusalem, he is teaching that same lesson, that lesson that leads to the cross. That to walk in his way, that to be a shepherd of his people, that to aspire to leadership means becoming a builder up of others and their talents. It means becoming a voice for the voices of those who cry for justice. It means being a carer of the sick and the dying and the poor, and a servant of all. The way that Jesus uses language of service, and even of slavery, is to emphasize with a jarring shock that one who aspires to walk in this way, as we all do this morning, one who aspires to imitate the Good Shepherd, one who wants to be a leader within the church, should allow their character to be formed and reformed again and again and again on a slow journey toward becoming someone who desires only to serve others, only for the sake of their servant-like well-being. It's quite an easy thing to say these pious-sounding things about service in a sermon, and about leadership in a talk, and about the way of Jesus Christ when we are standing or sitting still. And since no one here at St. Mary's is likely to kill another person with a sword or be killed in that way, perhaps all our attempts to follow the way of Jesus will be less challenging than James's. The same way as his, nevertheless, is the one we tread. A way that motivates our desire to serve each other within the body of Christ by acts of small but ongoing self-sacrifice, such as the decision that we've made at St. Mary's to continuing to encourage us all to wear face masks in our services, which do very little to protect each individual, but do much to protect the other individual members of our congregation, especially those who are most vulnerable. The decision we might take to maintain our commitment to community work or to charitable giving when it seems hard or demanding, or when we face the kind of obstacles of logistics that force us to be more creative. It motivates our desire as an outward-looking community to serve our parish with diligence and care, not being motivated by a kind of desire for increased attendance, not being desperate and seeking to place bums on pews, or out of anxiety about our faith's position within a kind of national hierarchy of success in being do-gooders, but from diligence and from care and from our integrity as people who seek this as part of our discipleship. It motivates us who follow the way of Jesus politically too, because it is undoubtedly a question of politics and of kingdoms that we try as a church to model a way in which our own structures of power, locally and within this congregation, nationally and within the Church of England, and also at those points where our structures of power meet others, so that rescue and redemption can become their bywords, so that those who have used those structures to lord it over each other, or who are motivated by their own self-interest, being shaped perhaps by a journey of the ego, they can be turned towards serving others only for the sake of their servant-like well-being. These are all symbols of our pilgrimage. These are, if you like, those scallop shells that mark us out in our character as leaders within our community and also as followers after St. James's way, in the way of service and in the way also of Jesus Christ.